Ballad of Johnny Arcane, Chapter 21, Freeland. 3 black coats stood on the bank. They wore no hoods. 2 had weathered faces with ragged beards. The 3rd was a young boy with long blonde hair. The old ones held daggers. The boy was empty-handed. One of the old ones looked back and gestured. "We got him. Go around so he doesn't get away." A dissonant chorus sounded from the clearing. Johnny jumped to his feet, his heart already broken, now racing. He scanned the surroundings. Maybe he could escape along the bed of the swale. The 2 older black coats were already scrambling down the boulders. The boy held back. Overhead, a sound like wind in a funnel, and a dark shadow swept the earth. For a moment, a black shape obscured the sky. Then the thud of heavy hooves shook the ground. The stallion reared, wailed, and pawed the air. The 2 black coats froze. One drew his dagger. The horse's hoof came down and dashed the dagger from his hand, and the man screamed in pain. A band of black coats appeared over the horizon. At the sight of the great horse thrashing its weight in the swale, some of them cried out, some of them fled, others fell to their knees. Johnny stepped back. And without knowing why, he grabbed some invisible substance from the air and held an open hand out toward the creature. "Trespasser." Trespasser pawed the ground and thrashed his muzzle. He pivoted, caught sight of Mars's body, and jumped back, startled. Then he stilled and whimpered like a child. He straddled the charred corpse, bent his long neck, and sniffed the cracked skin. His big tongue came out and made one pass across the dead man's blistered face. Then he looked at Johnny's outstretched hand. He stepped carefully away from the body and approached with caution and curiosity. His nostrils flared. He parted his lips, bared his teeth, inhaled, and swallowed the invisible thing from Johnny's palm. His eyes grew wide, his head reared back. He danced a quick circle and presented Johnny his side. The message was clear. "Get on, let's go." More black coats were swarming over the rise. They held clubs and long knives, and they shrieked with fury. Johnny leapt, grabbed the mane, and swung his leg over the horse's bare back. A gunshot rang out, then another. Johnny sunk his face into the mane and clenched his arms and legs around the body. He counted 3 muffled hoofbeats, and then he felt a sensation like falling, only upward. He dared not raise his head. The wails of the black coats were receding in the distance. Something brushed his hand. The reins were dangling from the horse's bridle. He curled his fingers around them loosely. He saw nothing. All sensation was motion and air, the rushing wind, the long slow arcs, and the measured impacts like a stone skipping on water. He felt objects flying from his body, tiny things dislodged by the wind, vanishing in the distance behind. Teacups, no larger than a speck of dust. Shirts and bed sheets as gossamers as a gnat's wing. Little red armbands, the pressure of miniature fingers. Grains of cornmeal, flakes of glass, bits of music, and the bawling songs of cows, coyotes, knitting needles, hoops. All these things sloughed from his skin as more and more oozed from the pores, took form, and flew away. This went on for a long time. Perhaps he slept, but he did not lose his grip. He learned to embrace the rise and fall of the rhythm and willed his body into it. The kneading of dough, the chopping of wood, the in and out of breathing, the thrust and release of sex. He heard music, a continuous drone, intoning a complex harmony. It was blown by the wind, but it wasn't just the wind. He could feel his body vibrating from a resonant point between his shoulders. Then he realized what it was. The mandolin, still strapped around his neck and riding his back. It was singing to the rush of wind and the freedom of escape. Freedom! His lungs filled with wonder and the terror of it. So much grief, so much had been lost in such a short time. Mars was dead, his head resting on the backpack which contained everything Johnny had carried or acquired since he left home so many moons ago. The box of maps, the picture of the waterfall, Lucy's letter, Jocko's sculptures, his canteens, corn lamps, jackets, and every other tool he needed for survival. He had heard Lucy's voice, but he had not seen her face, and now she too was free. Freedom in all its terror and wonder, and he did not know where she was. And yet he felt the great and familiar elation, the lightness he remembered every time he left a place and set out alone on the open road. The music of the wind across the strings sung its song, transformed all the sorrow into sweetness. But he could not lift his head. He could only trust the wisdom of the horse. Trespasser had tasted something invisible from the palm of his hand, and it had infused him with knowledge. A course was set, a purpose was determined. There was nothing to do but hang on tightly for as long as it took, to surrender to the forward motion, while the wind continuously inhaled sorrow and exhaled sweetness through the singing of the strings. At some point, he became aware that he was no longer moving. For how long he could not tell. He felt the sun low on the horizon, its warmth on his shoulders. It must be late then, and he remembered it was early morning when he had climbed on Trespasser's back. Then the realization sunk in. The sun in the sky. He had not actually seen its orb since he first crossed the border 3 full moons ago. He sat up abruptly. He was still on the horse. Trespasser was standing knee-high in a field of green, grazing contentedly. Johnny scanned the western horizon. Indeed, the fiery ball of the sun was just now dipping evening orange into a ridge of pointed firs. There was a cool breeze ushering in a scent of verdant promise. The green meadow rolled on to a darkening eastern horizon, befouled with gray vapors. But directly before him stood a forest of strong and stately evergreens, and a road welcoming into it, and a carved wooden sign hanging above the road with one word: Freeland. And below this sign, a portly, dark-skinned, and bearded man, standing, smiling, wrapped in a pumpkin orange robe. Johnny burst into tears. Every emotion that had been hiding in his cloistered heart broke out at once, and the world disappeared in a blur. He cried, Openly, loudly, he bawled like a baby. He mopped his face with his hands. Snot poured out of his nose. His convulsions settled into sobs. His vision cleared. He looked at the orange-robed man still standing, still smiling. He found his voice. Bow wow. Bow wow chuckled, pressed his fingers together, and bowed ever so slightly. Welcome to Freeland, Johnny Arcane. We've been expecting you. Come down and walk with me now. The horse needs a rest. Johnny felt another wave of tears rushing toward his eyes, but he fought them back. Bow wow, he said in a tattered voice. I killed a man. Lucy is free, but I let her get away. And Mars is dead. What did I say, Johnny Arcane? Walk with me. We can talk about it. Johnny slipped off the horse. When his feet hit the ground, his knees buckled and he collapsed in a heap. His legs had gone completely numb from the long ride. Bow Wow helped him up and took Trespasser by the reins. They entered the cool, deepening shade of the forest. It makes me sad about Mars, but I'm not surprised. It was his destiny. But Lucy, that is very good news. You have a destiny too, Johnny, and you are fulfilling it. I will send out scouts. They will bring her back here. And you will stay with us for a while to rest and recover. But it can't be for long. The Dark Ones will come looking for you, and our power is not yet strong enough to resist them. But don't worry, you'll be safe. We will give you protection along your way. Look. Bow Wow raised his hands to the sky. Johnny looked up. Between the branches above the road, a cord was suspended, and another sign hung there, the same as the sign at the entrance to the forest, but the wood was more weathered and the letters more obscured. Freeland. This used to be the entrance, but the forest has grown. Our work presses outward always, but it's very slow. As slow as the growth of new trees. You'll see what I mean. They passed under the sign. Johnny began to see buildings nestled among the trees, moss-covered and thatch-roofed, blending so well into the glade that he discerned them mostly by the glint of light from the windows. I returned to the bathhouse some time later, he said. It had been completely destroyed. I was told it was the Blackcoats. Bow Wow did not answer right away. They walked for a while. It was meant to happen. Sometimes I think our time there was only for one purpose, so that you could come to us. And you did. You keep your promises, Johnny. I don't remember making a promise. You don't have to remember them to keep them. They arrived at a green meadow framed by a ring of blue flowers. Another sign hung above the entrance to the meadow, but the writing on it was gone. This was the original entrance to Freeland, Bow Wow said. In the clearing, people gathered in a cluster, moving the dough, men and women, all dressed in identical orange robes. Their movements were perfectly synchronized. They scooped up invisible things from the air, rolled them into balls, stretched them into ribbons, flung them skyward, and then scooped up more. You are tired. A meal and a bed tonight. Tomorrow you will see what we are about. They cut a course directly across the meadow. The dough movers, enwrapped by their own movements, did not seem to notice. On the other side, the forest resumed, but here there were oaks, ancient and stately, gracefully gnarled. A village had been carved into the hillside, founded with stones and wattled with wood and straw so that everything blended into everything else. The entrances arched, resembling caves. Perhaps they were caves, and their structure was merely conformed to their meanderings. People in robes were walking about. Some carried things, bundles of firewood, bunches of carrots, crates of apples. They smiled at Bow Wow, but they did not speak. They came to a complex of wooden stalls where ponies and donkeys were stabled. The young boy who took trespassers' reins was awestruck to behold something as magnificent as a horse. They entered a labyrinth of tunnels. Candles flickered and flecks of crystal in the rounded walls sparkled in the light. There were wonderful smells of good things cooking and faint traces of soft music. Bow Wow led him to a room. The ceiling curved over a small bed covered with a colorful quilt. On the bedside table stood an amber bottle and a mug. Across from the bed, a pool, steaming slightly, glowed faintly blue from within. Take off your clothes and leave them outside the door. Bathe. We will bring you supper and a robe to wear. Don't worry, you won't have to wear the robe into the world. We will wash your clothes. Sleep well now, Johnny Arcane. Your journey is not finished. He did as he was told. His clothes were stained with blood, and the mud of blood mixed with dust. There were flecks of vomit in his beard and a stain of bile on his skin. This had been his condition when he first came to the bathhouse and Lucy had bathed him and given him back his voice. He lowered himself into the warm water of the pool. His own hands were her hands, washing him clean. He sang her song to himself. Begone, begone, the mud of sorrow. Begone, begone, the filth of sorrow. Begone, begone, the stink of sorrow. Come on, into the pool, be clean. Out of the bath, he fingered the orange robe, but he did not put it on. There was a knock on the door. Naked, he opened it. As always, there was no one there. As always. As if nothing else had taken place between those 7 sweet and distant days and nights and this deep and mysterious moment, redolent with the aromas of the past. Johnny lifted the tureen and inhaled the fragrance, so familiar, the blend of cardamom and clove, the sweetness of honey. Just before he ducked back into the room, he heard footsteps down the hall. 2 orange robes disappeared through a doorway, girlish voices giggling at the ridiculous sight of a naked man. Naked, he sat at the table and ate the soup, savoring every bite. For a long time afterward, he contemplated the amber bottle and the empty mug. Surely it was permissible. This was Freeland. He could do no harm. He poured a small amount in the bottom of the mug and sipped it. Yes, it was the same. The woodruff and the damiana and the bracing heat of the spirits. He filled the mug and set it on the table and slipped into the bed. The sheets were velvet soft, and there were 2 big, plumpy pillows. A candle danced from a wall sconce. Johnny took a long, slow draught from the mug, and then another. How persistent had become the ragged discomforts of life on the road, sleeping uncovered on hard rocks under a storm-filled sky, trudging soaked and bitter cold through dark forests, or parched and famished under a blazing sun. the misery of illness, the cruelty of men and women, and still arrives this interlude of comfort, like a smile from some unnamed benevolence. Lucy. The room disappeared in the candle glow, and he was there again in the little cabin above the bathhouse, the last discords of the music still ringing, and their naked bodies aglow with the warmth of the elixir, merging into a seamless union that laughed in the face of sorrow and pressed its sure and steady hand toward the heart of pleasure.